I'm Anthony Wright, and I am your co-host on Living Conversation with
Adam Dietz.
and Adam. Before the break, we forgot to say you can contact me at theonaut.com, and there's a comment section where you can leave your questions, or you can go to Adam's Substack. And what's your Substack, Adam?
Yeah, it's at the way between.
At the way between. Okay. So before the break, we were talking about this idea of cultivation is ongoing. And part of the thing, we wonder, you and I have had conversation where we wonder how people can make the choices that they do. And I remember you talking to me about low effort thinking, right? And yet cultivation is not necessarily effortful, but what comes to mind to ask you that, and you're a soccer coach and you teach very beginning players, right? And it's about teaching them the fundamentals, but then you also coach high school kids too, right?
I did. I
Okay.
did.
So you have.
Mhm.
So can you talk to me about what it is then to offer somebody the fundamentals of a sport or of a philosophy, and then assist them to develop that so that they can now begin to cultivate their skill to then when they finally find themselves in the zone.
No, that's a really interesting question. I think,
But it happens like that, doesn't it?
yeah. In soccer and in philosophy, so I guess I would take my own experience as a soccer player.
Right.
We had to just spend hours and hours and hours and hours on the fundamentals, and the fundamentals became automatic. So
that's the deal.
Yeah. So your coach would tell you, and a lot of times my players don't necessarily get to this point. It's a different situation than we used to do when I was growing up. But our coach would tell us, and I do tell my players this: you need to go practice against a wall, and you need to practice a repeatable technique over and over and over again, so that way it becomes second nature. So that you don't think about that part. You can now look up, read the game, and do whatever you need to do.
Okay.
So your skill and your technique just come naturally. You have a feel for the ball. You have a feel for what your feet are doing. You have a feel for how to collect the ball, how to distribute the ball. That way your mind can look at a higher level at the game and read it and move and get open for each other, find a good pass, find some spaces to play into. And this is very similar to philosophy in the sense that at first you really have to be kind of disciplined with yourself. You know? And I think a lot of times people in spirituality and philosophy maybe in the beginning are almost too hard on themselves, too hard on other people, trying to really make sure they commit themselves to this practice, to this path. But as you practice, for example, we actually do crunchy formal critical thinking in my class as well. So in that textbook studies, you realize, okay, I practice the beginning of critical thinking, premise, conclusion. You learn the rules, you learn the methods,
Right.
but I think you and I can attest that as you continue to practice this over and over again, you just the basic human capacity to be reasonable. We all have a BS meter. We're born with it. We all know when someone's being reasonable and not reasonable.
Right.
So we just, the critical thinking formalizes that. But the point is, after you practice over and over again, now you find yourself actually you can use critical thinking very deeply. I'm feeling this emotion. Is this emotion reasonable? My significant other is saying this to me. Are they being reasonable? Now you can use critical thinking at a very skilled, high level as second nature. You don't even think about it. You just check in with yourself. Is this reasonable? Am I being reasonable? Are they being reasonable? So at first, our students, 101 students, practice critical thinking. Oh, a big argument, big debate. Premise, conclusion.
There was a friend of mine who said, please don't use that word argument. Well, this doesn't mean necessarily confrontation.
No.
It's more of a structured form of how to offer reason.
Certain words in our class have specific meaning for critical thinking, like the word valid. Everyone uses just as a good argument.
Yep.
But not
Oh
to get
no,
too
it's
deep in
very
the weeds,
structured.
but there's the language all very specific. So argument and critical thinking is just something that has a premise and conclusion. The chain of thought is supposed to be reasonable. They're attempting to present a case, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the things that I think is so important is understanding how people are presenting their case. And there are certain fallacies or errors in argument. For example, ad hominem, which is to the person. So if I ask you a question that you don't like, you start to say, "What a terrible person I am," or a red herring. And I really like the story about. I ask my students a question on the midterm: is a red herring a species of fish? Right? But it was this idea about, well, we were tracking a certain idea, and it's like drugs on the trail of something, and then you drag a stinky fish across to distract. And there are a number of things like begging the question. But I think these are all tools in reason. But also, one of the things about philosophy, and I wonder if Western philosophy gets into this, I know that Eastern philosophy does. Um, how do we use the tools and then put the tools down and go and to read the field, to be in the game, and to understand when we're being offered an argument that is stinky. I'm sorry, it's right. But you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because in theory, Western civilization was built on I think we mentioned last time, taking a good argument and using it, rejecting a bad argument. So
Right.
this is in good faith. What we're all trying to do in Western civilization as a public project is build off of good arguments, use good arguments, then we can stand on the shoulders of the next person and create something even better.
But we're independent thinkers. And would you say it seems like one of the tools of an independent thinker, and wasn't that what Socrates was convicted of, was corrupting the youth by making them independent thinkers?
Well,
right?
denying the gods and corrupting the youth. Yeah, and he has his argument in the Apology to counteract that, but it's absolutely true. You see that he was clearly trying to make all of Athens better. He was clearly trying to make the youth better.
And part of that, one of those tools, is to continue the process of cultivation, to continue to question, right?
Sure.
And so, it's really interesting to me to think about another idea about social hypnosis, about, well, how come people are doing a particular thing, and in having studied hypnosis, there are three components. One of them is to suspend the critical faculty. Second one is heightened suggestibility, and the third one is take the voice of the person who is uh, imposing the trance as one's own internal story. So it's really interesting about the stories that people tell themselves, according to whom, and also and where are they guided from? Is it from AM radio? Is it from MSNBC? Where is it from? And again, what are the stories that we tell ourselves? So I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but it's again, to be an independent thinker. And part of that is sometimes you have to go into a little higher effort thinking. Would you say? I mean, what's your experience in as a coach?
Well, two things. One, as a higher level thinker, people can just be lazy and just want to accept an idea and not re-examine it. That's what Socrates tried to train everyone
Exactly.
to always be willing to re-examine.
always examine.
Yeah, and re-examine.
By evidence.
Mm.
And evidence, I like to say to my students, okay, what's the key word of evidence? It's vide. What is to be seen? But continue, please.
Yeah, so even on his deathbed, he committed his whole life to wisdom and virtue.
Even on
Even
his
on his
deathbed,
deathbed,
his
his
friend
friend
Crito
Crito
comes to
comes to
him
him and tried to convince him to escape.
Oh,
But Socrates says, okay, well, let's re-examine. And says, do you agree that virtue is important? Let's start over. So people,
wow.
if we practice this in our daily life, and some salesman or manipulator comes to us and we start to kind of fall for their shtick, for their spiel, then we have to say, okay, well, let's re-examine at some point. This is leading me into certain directions, and I pay attention to where it's leading me.
Do
Now,
I really need another widget?
do I like where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Is this, I remember I was probably 13,
Mhm.
and there was a popular radio host
that would
that
come
would come
on
on
after
after a baseball game,
or
or after the
Oh.
morning show of a baseball game.
Right.
And I was a baseball fan, so I started listening to this host.
Oh,
And
okay.
after a few weeks, I started repeating what the host was saying and the key points. And all my dad said was, okay, well, there's two sides to every argument. Just pay
Yep.
attention,
Yep.
and see what you think. That's all he said. So actually, I paid attention to this host, and I realized after another week of listening, they're always contradicting themselves. The point they just made last week, now they've thrown out the window at their own convenience. So they weren't being reasonable. You can see very quickly. Just examine, you'll see who is being reasonable, who is acting in good faith, or who is manipulating, who is practicing face-saving thinking, or self-centered thinking, or some obstacles we study in our
Right.
class to critical thinking.
Right.
So paying attention, keeping your humanity, keeping your reason.
Yeah. Boy, that's such uh, a key basis about compassionate, good faith,
Mm.
and you know, and attending to the evidence and re-examining. Were you aware that you were offering the points of the commentator?
Probably not.
Not initially,
Yeah, no,
but your dad brought your attention to it, and then you re-examined, and then you had a choice.
yeah.
Wow. So, and we're at a point where we have to choose to end this show at this present time, and I'm your co-host on the Living Conversation with
Adam Dietz.
And please send us your questions. My website is Theonaut, Theonaut. I'm not an astronaut, but I'm a Theonaut. And there's a comment section there. And you can email Adam. Also, you have a Substack?
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I hope that these are things we can reflect upon. And part of giving our Substack, giving our email is so
we can hear
we
your
your
reflection.
reflection.
Yeah,
It
It
contextualizes everything, and
it
shows all the different avenues that humanity and the way can take and come and see different contexts where these issues come up. So please comment on my Substack, the way between on Substack, and also you can reach me if you need help finding that type of stuff or want to have a different kind of discussion by email. Just deetsadam@gmail.com.
And how do you spell that?
Dietz is Dietz.
Great.
Adam, one word.
Well, we're very grateful for your having tuned in and watched the show, and we will see you next time. I'm Anthony Wright,
And I'm Adam Dietz.
and please cultivate the way.